Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to one more year, one more semester, one more academic year. This is an exciting course, computer vision. This is an advanced course. I see a lot of people here, so I just want to make sure that we all understand what the background is. And I know many of you have emailed me with regard to this. So we'll spend some time discussing what is required for this course and why, what are the basics that you need to have, what we are more or less going to cover in this course. This course is not as structured as the previous course, 𝗜�𝘀𝘁𝗿𝗂𝗰𝘁cie, just because of the nature of advanced computer vision. I'd probably call this course advanced computer vision with some image processing in it, versus the introduction to image processing computer vision that you have hopefully taken, 𝗜�𝘀𝘁𝗿𝗂𝗰𝘁cie, which covers the very basic tools and methods. Okay, so I've already activated the website in Carmen, so make sure that you look into this. First homework for you to do is just to actually check that that you can access everything, that you can see the syllabus, the handouts, the project assignments, the homework, and so on. Okay, everything that I'm going to post, everything that I'm going to announce is going to be in Carmen, right? I'm going to announce things here in class, obviously, but it's always going to be in Carmen, so make sure that you check that regularly. It is important to note also that Carmen has the deadline for submitting your homework and your projects, and there is a set date and time for you to submit the deadline for you to submit your homework and project. Carmen closes automatically after that deadline, right? So it used to be the case that you would turn things here in class with me, you know, we're talking about 5-6 years ago, on paper. And if you were 5 minutes late, that was fine. I was still here. Now Carmen just closes at that point in time that we set. So there's just not even a second late allowance for turning the homework, right? So make sure that you know what the dates are. Now in computer vision, I'm going to assume, as I said, that you have taken a variety of courses. You need to know basics of linear algebra, basics of statistics and probability, obviously calculus or functional analysis, if you want to call it that, etc. But most importantly is that you have taken here at Ohio State ECE 𝗜�𝘀𝘁𝗿𝗂𝗰𝘁cie, or as I said, Introduction to Image Processing and Computer Vision. Okay. Now you might have come here as a grad student and have taken a similar course elsewhere. That is fine by me if that is the case, but check the syllabus of 𝗜�𝘀𝘁𝗁𝗂𝗰𝘁cie to make sure that you have covered all these topics. Now, if you have not, I strongly urge you to take that course now in this semester. You may want to decide to take both courses simultaneously. That's up to you. The only reason I would ever suggest this is because I usually only teach this advanced computer vision course every other year. So some of you may not even be here by the next time I teach it. So if that's what you want to do, that's fine, but make sure that you do take that course. If you think that you have taken a similar course elsewhere, and that more or less you know all the topics that have been covered in 𝗜�𝘀𝘁𝗿𝗂𝗰𝘁cie here at OSU, then I would still encourage you to go online. We have a YouTube channel where these lectures are also going to be posted, and I'll post the link in Carmen so you can directly go there. Okay, but we have all the lectures of the introductory course to image processing computer vision from last year in YouTube. So this is 20 plus lectures, forget exactly the number, right? Go there and watch those videos if you have not taken ECE 5460 here at Ohio State. I really encourage you to do that because I am going to take so many things for granted. I'm going to assume that you know those things. And if you don't, you're going to get lost pretty quickly, right? So I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Now, how do you watch these videos in YouTube? Because let's face it, watching videos in YouTube is not like being in class, right? I mean, not even close. Not only you are not here interacting with me, asking questions, checking things, but you're not doing the homework, you're not doing the projects, etc. So what's the best way, or actually let's start with what's the worst way of watching these videos? Well, you're having dinner, or maybe after dinner, you just watch this YouTube like you watch any other series or movie, right? Worst case scenario. If you do that, I encourage you not even bother. Don't watch it, because it's just going to be a waste of your time, right? And your time is too valuable for that. The way you watch these videos, it's 8 a.m. in the morning, right? You watch a video, you pause, you rewind as much as you need. You check the literature that's attached to the information of the video, not only the slides, but all the papers, book chapters, what have you, that are associated with that topic, okay? Unless you watch a lecture and go like, oh my gosh, I've taken this in 2 different courses at my institution before coming to OSU. Yeah, okay, if you know it that well, fine. But if not, do your homework, do it right, because otherwise you're not going to understand computer vision. And I insist on this because computer vision by itself right now, it's one of the most exciting topics out there in computer engineering, or electrical and computer engineering, if you want, in computer science. Right now, the main conferences and the main journals in computer vision are among the most cited and respected conferences and journals in all of science and engineering. Not just in computer engineering, but all of science and engineering. It's amazing. All the major employers are hiring in that area, but they're not going to hire you. I mean, maybe some will, but they're not going to hire you just because you took ECE 5460. They're going to hire you because you have taken 5460, you have taken this advanced course in computer vision, right? And you have done some type of project that proves that you have learned that stuff, right? Now, this course is not as well structured as said earlier, because it's structured in a way that changes every time I teach it. So the first let's say about a third, maybe a little over a third of the course, of this computer vision course, is going to be, we're going to cover very classical topics in computer vision. Topics that you would have learned, obviously with changes because things advance over time, but topics that you would have learned in the 1990s, in the early 2000s, and maybe in the early 2010s, okay? This is the fundamental block of information that you're going to need to understand the new stuff. Without that, there's just no way to fully grasp what is the richness of the new topics or the new methods and approaches in computer vision, right? And so many people just learn about one specific thing that it's famous or that they have seen in the news, in TV or a newspaper or a magazine, and they look into this and say, oh, this is really cool. But if you really know the history of computer vision, you say, well, this is just that small variation from that classical view of doing computer vision. And that allows you then to follow the progression of computer vision from the time that you leave Ohio State. Because computer vision is advancing so fast that if you graduate from Ohio State with that degree in computer vision, 5 years from now, you're going to be obsolete. The only hope is that you learn to learn the new methods in computer vision. And that's what we're going to teach here, okay? All right, so as I said, please do check the syllabus of 5460. I can give you a very quick overview of some of the main topics that are covered in EC 5460. It covers camera models, which is fundamental to understand the generative process of images, camera calibration, geometry of multi-view and scenes or objects. This is a topic that we will come back to here in this course. Structure from motion, which we will revisit as well. All these first topics are in the big group I call geometry in image processing, computer vision, or photogrammetry. Then there is radiometry, which is the study of light, which where we talked about shading models, shadows, optical flow. We briefly talked about image segmentation, which we'll talk more about in this course. We then spent quite a bit of time in the last third of the course talking about vector spaces, right? Hilbert spaces, Fourier analysis, and that included linear filters, which is going to be needed to understand the first topics that we're going to cover in computer vision, in fact, okay? And at the very end, we briefly talk about the projective transformation, projective space, very briefly in 5460. Here, we're going to have an extensive discussion of the projective space, okay? Last year, we didn't have time to cover quaternions in image processing, computer vision, so we will probably cover them here, time permitting. And we also talk about color at the end of 5460. So do check those things out. All right. So in 5460, we covered topics that most people, not everyone, but most people will mostly associate to what's called image processing. That means ways of processing the image, right? So how can we process the image to either change that image, analyze the image in some specific way, reconstruct the scene that we see, et cetera, et cetera. That means that we basically learn the inverse function of the process of going from 3D to 2D. So what's image generation? Image generation is nothing else than going from the world we live in, which is three-dimensional, to a two-dimensional image. That's the image generation process. Image processing is concerned on going from that 2D image to that 3D interpretation, right? Or one of the main topics. So that's one of the things that we covered in image processing. Okay. So as I said, this includes topics in camera models, calibration, multi-view geometry, radiometry, image and video representation, and we spent some time talking about video representations. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about video representations here as well. The main tools that we also talk in image processing, we also talk about compression and other things that we are not going to discuss here because this is totally unrelated to computer vision, okay? Now, the main tools that we introduce in 5460 are, first and foremost, linear least squares. Now, if you don't know what linear least squares is, then you really must take 5460 because you are going to be lost from the very first lecture here, right? We also talked about some basic methods of non-linear least squares. We're going to spend a lot of time here talking about non-linear least squares, all right? In fact, I always every year I make the same joke in 5460. I say that course should not be called Introduction to Image Processing Computer Vision, but rather linear least squares. This is basically what we do, plus some Fourier analysis and Hilbert spaces and all that, but people that have taken a course will relate to that. That's basically all we do. So again, linear least squares, we saw some very basic types of nonlinear least squares, which we'll extend here. And we spend quite a bit of time defining what a Hilbert space is and all of Fourier analysis. I assume that you know this, right? You know what a Hilbert space is, you know what the norm is, how to define norms with an inner product, and so on and so forth, right? And how to do Fourier analysis. All right. So I'm going to assume you're familiar with these topics, the methods that I've mentioned, and the corresponding algorithms. And this course in particular, computer vision, is going to extend on all of that and cover additional topics, right? So we will define a specific new topics that are very classical in computer vision, or even some new topics that are coming up in computer vision that we would have never mentioned in 5460. So we will see that. We will spend a lot of our time introducing new methods to do computer vision, okay? Now, I will reiterate this today and throughout the course, but there is a fundamental problem in computer vision research. And computer vision is not the sole area where this happens. And what happens is that if you want to publish a paper, right, a research paper in computer vision or a book, what you do is you design a new method, you propose a new method, you design an algorithm, you implement it, and then you compare how this algorithm performs against some data sets that are available online, right? And you plot these results in some plots, nice ROC curves, accuracy, F1 scores. We'll talk about all of this in detail on how this is done, or classically a table where you have the accuracy of each algorithm on each data set. And the goal is that you have to prove that your algorithm performs better than every other algorithm on those data sets. That is useless. That's the problem. The fact that you can outperform by a small margin, usually, other methods on all these available data sets doesn't mean that you have solved the vision problem. And what computer vision really is about solving the vision problem. Now, we'll spend a lot of time, too, trying to understand what is the vision problem. It's not as easy as it sounds to define such a simplistic problem. The human brain, for example, depending on how you compute this, the human brain, or about, let me say it this way, about 50% of the human brain is devoted to solving the vision problem. Again, depending on how you define vision. So that's how complicated the vision problem is. But contrary to what some people would claim, computer vision is not limited to what human vision can do, right? Human vision, for starters, only sees in the so-called visual spectrum, right? And if you've taken 5460, we talk a lot about this when we discuss color perception. So the visual spectrum is just a narrow band of the electromagnetic wave, right? There are many other frequencies that we do not observe, like ultraviolet, near-infrared, infrared, gamma rays, and so on, right? But there are devices out there that do. And in some applications, you may want to use those, right? And what's the problem with that? So, in fact, you may actually solve problems better than humans by using additional technologies like this, right? So the computer vision problem is not restricted to just the human visual problem. But the human visual problem is already difficult enough to warrant a whole set of courses, okay? So we'll talk about all these things and all the problems, or some of the problems that are addressed in computer vision. And for that, as I said, the most important thing is in this course is not going to be, although I'll give you links to all these things, but the most important thing in this course is not to show you this algorithm outperforms these other algorithms on these data sets. I don't care about this. What I care about is what are the methods that have been defined out there that have been demonstrated to be useful in a variety of applications or in some topics within computer vision that you can use and easily modify or extend to apply to the problems you're going to see out there once you go to work for a company, right? That's what you need to know. Okay. We'll also focus on a specific computer vision problems from now and again, where the goal is to understand what is observed in the image or a video. Okay, and that is one of the most classical ways of presenting computer vision, by introducing problems where we want to, and I'm going to use quotation marks here, want to understand what we are observing, right? And what we're observing could be in the form of a single image, a set of images, or a video sequence. Okay, sequence of images in video format. Now, by understand, we can assume a variety of meanings. We can say we want to understand semantically what's in the image. I mean, giving some semantic description of what's going on. We can be less restrictive. We just want some syntactic description of that image. So for example, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about object recognition, right? Where all we want to know is there a chair or a table or a car in that image, right? What else? We may want to understand the image, as we did in 5460, by trying to understand the three-dimensional structure of an object or a scene, right? Or the three-dimensional structure plus a temporal structure, so the 4D dimension of a video sequence, okay? So all these things are included in our understanding of what we observe. So you will soon see that there are, in fact, many ways of trying to solve this so-called vision problem. Okay? There's no one way, one approach that is best or better at solving each specific problem, or all the problems for that matter. In fact, this is something that we will come back to time and again. The sole definition of this algorithm or this method or this approach is optimal is absurd. There is no algorithm that is better than any other algorithm to solve any specific problem. None. Let me repeat this because it's so crazy. There is no algorithm that is better than any other algorithm at solving any specific problem. In fact, that means that I could compare my algorithm to just a random algorithm, right? That does random things. And I can never prove that my algorithm is better than this random algorithm, whatever the randomness is, depending on either image segmentation or 3D reconstruction or object recognition. The only way to determine whether an algorithm is better than another one is by defining a criterion with which I'm going to compare these two algorithms. Right? So for example, as I was saying earlier, if I have two algorithms and I have a data set of objects that has been manually annotated so that I know for each image in that data set which objects I see in each image, and then each of these two algorithms automatically annotates all the images, then I can define a criterion or a metric, right, that specifies how well my algorithm or the other algorithm compares to the manual annotations. But that's a very specific way of measuring this, right? The way I specify to measure this. And we will talk about this. Depending on the criterion that you use, one algorithm is going to be better than another algorithm. Okay? So for example, there is a problem, classical problem in computer vision, which is object detection, right? Or some feature detection. And we'll talk a lot about this. So, for example, I don't know, let's say that I have a camera pointing at the door here, this main door to this room, right? And I want to detect when someone goes through the door, right? And I want to know over the course of 24 hours how well my algorithm does. Well, let me give you an algorithm. I'm going to find a one line of code algorithm. That algorithm is always going to say no one is crossing that door. No one is entering the room, no one is exiting the room. How often will my algorithm be accurate? The majority of the time, right? Maybe 99-point-something% of the time. So if that is my criterion in measuring how well my algorithm does, then any other algorithm that tries to do the right thing is going to have a really hard time beating me, right? So what does it mean that my algorithm is better than any other, or that any other cannot be better than me? It means I've chosen the wrong criterion, right? That's why it makes no sense to say there's an optimal algorithm. There's a better algorithm. Well, with respect to what? Give me the criterion. We will see that depending on the metric that you use, you're going to have algorithm 1 getting better results than algorithm 2. And changing the metric will change that order. Algorithm 2 is going to be better than algorithm 1. What does this mean? Right? Well, it depends of what we want to achieve. Right? The way we design experiments and the way we compute that metric or we define that criterion has to be carefully crafted to model what we want to achieve in our problem. So that's how things work in science and engineering. First thing that you always have to do, I mean, this is mandatory, not for computer vision, for everything that you're going to do in your life in science and engineering. First thing, define the problem. If you don't know what the problem is, then just don't try to solve it because you don't know what the problem is. Now, as much sense as this makes, right, you'll be shocked how often people like you here in class and people out there in the real world, right, real world, actually make that mistake of not defining the problem. And you always see these apps for phones or these algorithms for computers, these papers in the research literature that have these algorithms that you go like, but what is the problem that they're trying to solve? And you just cannot figure it out. And you know, at some point they'll show you one of these useless tables like, oh, we're better than this other algorithm on this data. Yeah, but what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Obviously, your problem cannot be given a criterion I just came up with, right? Or one of the existing ones, I just picked the criterion that gives advantage to my algorithm, right? Like the one I've just described for my one line of code algorithm to detect who goes through the door. Whether that algorithm performs equivalently or better than some other randomly selected algorithms on some silly data set. That's not what we want, right? What we want is what is your method that is presented here, or the algorithm that we're describing, what is the specific problem that method or this algorithm solves? So that's the very first thing that we need to understand, the problem. Second thing is to define a method to solve that problem, right? Now, generally, if you have formulated your problem correctly, finding a method to address that problem is much easier, or very easy, or well, easy most of the time, let's put it this way, okay? Why? Because a good definition of the problem already includes the solution, right? The obvious solution, at least. All right. And then third, what we need to do is to define experiments that test whether my method actually does address the problem that I have set out to solve with some data, right? And for that, I do need data. Now, there are two things when you do this last step of testing your algorithm. The first thing, you need to understand what are the assumptions embedded in your solution to the problem. Now, as silly as this sounds, this is harder done than said, because some of the assumptions are going to be so clearly stated in my definition of either the problem or the solution to the problem that I'm not going to have problem understanding what those assumptions are. Those are the assumptions I just made. But some other assumptions are so convoluted, included in my method, that not even I know they are there, right? And it is my task to understand which assumptions I am making by defining that method, because otherwise I cannot test my method. Because the very first thing that you need to do when you test your algorithm is test whether your algorithm performs well when those assumptions actually hold. So if you assume, for example, that an object can never be occluded, that's your assumption, then you first test whether your algorithm actually works when it's not the object is not occluded, right? But what you want to do after you have shown that, yes, indeed, my algorithm works as expected under the correct assumptions, how much can I break my assumptions and still have an algorithm that works pretty reasonably? And then you want to start breaking your assumptions little by little to see to what extent you can push your algorithm. And you can only do that if you understand the assumptions, right? And you can only do that if you understand how to measure which algorithm is better than others, and so on and so forth. So we're going to cover all these topics. Okay. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the syllabus. You have it in Carmen. But we're going to meet in this classroom. I think this is obvious. The main topics are not specifically listed in the syllabus for the reasons that I have stated, but I am going to spend some time today describing what type of vision problem we're going to address in the duration of this class, and that will specify to some degree the different topics that we're going to cover in the course. If you need to reach me for office hours are listed in the syllabus, but if you need to reach me for office hours, it doesn't hurt to send me an email or connect through Carmen to let me know that you're coming specific time, so that I'm not in the lab talking to my PhD students, or I'm not walking on the second floor to solve some administrative task that I have to do, what have you, right? I'm typically there, but just to let you know. Now, with regard to grades, I don't know why people always ask about this. As you'll see in the syllabus, there's going to be a moderate amount of homework and small projects, which are considered homework. And that's going to count for 50% of your grade, so half of the grade. So try to finish all of them and do a good job, because even missing one homework could have an effect on your final grade, okay? Now, we are going to have a midterm. Now, don't panic about the midterm. It's going to be easier than what you think, but it's going to cover very basic concepts that we were going to discuss in class and in the homework, so that just to make sure that you have absorbed that information. Because for the first half of the course, all that information is the most important for you to embed to tattoo in your brain so that you can then understand the second part of the course. And then at the end, we're going to have either a final exam or a final project. I think that this year we're going to do a final project. I don't think that there is any need for a final exam. We'll see how things develop, but that would be my recommendation. And then again, the midterm counts for 25% of your final grade, and the final project another 25%. Okay. You will see in the syllabus as well a number of things. There are the standard rules of Ohio State. So please look into this. There is more information at the Ohio State University's website. So if you're not familiar with those because you're new here, please do check those. Policies on late assignment. Remember that homework has to be uploaded in Carmen. There is no, cannot be allowed, we don't allow to, for you to submit a late homework or projects. With regard to projects and homework, those are always individual projects and homework. That means that it has to be your work. Now, having said that, I encourage people, always encourage people to work in groups if they so choose to. It's good to learn from others, right? We're not perfect. We're better in a group than by individuals. But one thing is to work in groups to understand a topic, and then going home or to your desk and solving the problem yourself, writing it down yourself, and turning it in yourself, right? Rather than solving something with someone else that maybe someone else has understood and you haven't, and just copying that solution, right? So that is not allowed, right? So plagiarism, copying from someone else, turning in the same solution, the same algorithm, the same code, what have you, of someone else is not allowed. That goes both for homework and for projects. Now, for some of the homework, and especially for some of the projects, you may just Google your way into some solution that's been posted online, right? Maybe, I don't know. Don't. We have tools to check whether you have done this, right? And we use these tools because they're available to us. And if we find out that you copied the code or a solution from a specific website, then we have to report you, right? This is the law at Ohio State. I have no choice. I don't think we reported anyone in computer vision last time. I taught it 2 years ago, not that I remember, but in image processing, every year we have to report someone. Don't be that one, right? Don't. It's and that once we report this, it's out of my control, right? I don't make any decisions. This is Ohio State making decisions. So please be careful with this. Exams for the midterm, for example, exams are closed book. There are no electronics allowed. That means phones, tablets, calculators, smart watches. I don't know. And these days, what's not? Okay. We do allow you to have a cheat sheet. So if you want to write in a one page both sides, every year I get this question 100 times. Even I say this 1,000 times. So you can write on both sides of that one sheet. But that's all you're allowed to have. And your pencils, pens, whatever you want to bring, obviously. There are no ways to do the any missed exams unless there was a reason stated previously that had been approved by myself. Okay, so talk to me if you have to miss the exam for some very serious reason. I have included here the information from OSU about the student conduct, so please make sure that you read this, and there are 3 web pages, the links to 3 web pages at Ohio State that cover this topic. Also be careful with copyright material, as I have mentioned. There's also a section here in the syllabus about disability services. If you have some type of disability that requires some accommodation, please let me know. We can accommodate you, including homework, exams, or whatever it's required. If it requires accommodation in homeworks and midterms or final exams, that requires approval from Ohio State. And I need to see that letter. They usually send me that letter in an email from the Office of Student Life and Disability Services. So if that's your case, please do check that. Also, please be aware of Title IX. Make sure that you understand the rules that are in place at every university in the US. There's also a university score service if you need any assistance at some point, and I have added the phone number here that you can call, and the counseling information. If you need any counseling, please do read this. We have a great service here at Ohio State. Please use it. Okay, any questions before we move on? No? All right, well, wonderful. So, shall we get started then? Okay. So it's hard to say what is the most classical way in computer vision. But computer vision mainly started as a summer project at MIT. I mean, that's story, and that's not the true history, but I mean, because, you know, as everything, there are just so many things in parallel. But one of the stories within this history goes as follows. Is this famous professor who is passed since, who was working on an AI project, right? And the project involved semantic understanding of the position of a certain number of blocks, kind of Legos, but made of wood and without the pointy parts. And there's a robot arm that could move these things around, right? And then they wanted to understand semantically what the position and relationship between the different blocks was. So that if you asked, what is the block, the color of the block under the, yellow pyramid, right? You would say, oh, there's a blue square or what have you, right? Or a blue box. Okay. That professor decided that it would be really cool if instead of entering manually by text, and that was in the 70s, so, you know, computers, everything was text-based, forget about computer graphics, right? Instead of entering in text what these blocks look like, it'd be really cool if they could have a camera looking at the actual blocks, right? And transcribing the position, the colors, and all the information from these blocks into that computer algorithm. So he decided to hire an undergrad student for one summer to solve that problem. Now, obviously, that project was approved. The professors thought it was doable. Poor student, 3 months later, had accomplished nothing. 40, almost 50 years later, we're still here trying to solve the problem, right? So the reason I mentioned the story is because it tells you that it tells the belief, it beautifully describes the belief that humans have about the easiness of the vision problem. Because to us, vision is trivial, right? I can recognize objects instantly, I can grasp them, I can manipulate them, I know this is a book, I know that this is also a book, right? I know that if I only see this, I also know this is a book. And so, but how do you teach a computer this, right? So we give it for granted, but the problem is really hard. There were other professors working on this at the same time that this story happened. And their goal was just basically to try to understand how images were created, or how image corresponded or correlated with a specific three-dimensional constructs of the world. So they go like, okay, this pixel has this level, that's a grayscale level or value, and this other pixel here has this other value, and this other pixel, this other value. What can I do with this? Like, it was at the pixel level, right? It was absolutely absurd. So this went on for many years, and with that, there was this development, the development of the idea that to understand a scene or an object, the very first thing that you needed to do was to reconstruct that scene and object into 3D, right? As I said earlier, in 5460, we spent a lot of time on this. We know that there is a function that maps, right, f of x, right, where x is my three-dimensional world, and there's a function f that maps this three-dimensional world into y, where y is a two-dimensional image. So if I could know what that f is, if I could model this, then I could compute f inverse, and it can go from 2D to 3D. Wonderful. We spent decades working on this. Many people still work on this, right? Just trying to solve that simple problem. Well, that's one way of looking into computer vision. Is that the best way? Well, you already know by now best doesn't mean anything, right? So, well, it depends what you want to achieve. In some cases, that's a good approach. And we'll spend a lot of time talking and expanding that approach that we introduced in 5460. But another, which become probably the most classical view of computer vision, another view of that was inspired by human vision, or to be more precise, what people thought, what researchers thought the human visual system, or how the human visual system works, right? All right, so here's what happens. We have, if I assume that you all know this, we have a pair of eyes, right, and a brain. And so this is what's called a sagittal view of the brain. And so if you see me from the side, right, do a cut like this, right, or an image like this, you have this sagittal view of the brain, right? So here's the frontal lobe, right, the front of the head. Here you'd have your eye bulb, right? And this is the back of the head, which is called the occipital lobe. This is called the temporal lobe. Don't write this down. So here in the eye, there are some neurons, okay? Sensors, some sensors and neurons. So in fact, when your optometrist or ophthalmologist looks inside your eye, you're actually looking literally in your brain, because part of your brain is actually here, the back of the eye. Okay? And then there's a huge bundle of nerves, of cells that leave the eye, go through a subcortical area here that's called the LGN. Again, do not write this down. And then from here, it goes to a variety of places. But, okay, say, back in the time where this was defined, they knew that it went back here into the occipital lobe in an area that became known as V1 or V1 like this, if you prefer. V1 for vision 1. That's where vision starts, right? Which is not totally true, because there's processing here, there's processing here, and then there's processing there, okay? And then from here, there are two pathways. The top pathway that goes to the parietal lobe, and the bottom pathway that goes through the temporal lobe, okay? And these main pathway here, let's forget about this one for a second. This one here, this pathway that helps us study or analyze the world that we observe, it's called the ventral pathway. It's called the ventral pathway because in neuroscience, we define things as being either anterior or posterior and either ventral or dorsal. Ventral comes from the side of the body and dorsal from that side of the body, okay? So now if I turn my head backwards, now this area of the brain aligns with the ventral side, and this area up here with the dorsal side, okay? So that's what this was known. It was also known that there's another area here that analyzes what V1 has analyzed. And anyone wants to guess what this was called, or is called, still called? V2, very good. So V2, and then there is V4, and then there is IT cortex here. Here at the very front, you have IT, and so on, right? There are many other areas. This is STS, superior temporal sulcus, and so on. There are a lot of areas. There's an area here, it's called MT+, which is where we analyze motion, etc. We'll talk briefly throughout the course on different areas of the brain. So some of these things we already know. Quite a bit of this was already known at the time. And this ventral pathway in the mammalian system was not only studied in detail, but believed to be fundamental to understand objects, scenes, etc. So the idea was that I could design computer vision algorithms that emulate this process, okay? And what happens here is a variety of different steps in these different areas that I have only named some of these areas, but in these areas, certain things happen. So for example, here in the retina and LGN and most of V1, there is an analysis, functional analysis of the image, or a frequency analysis of the image that we covered in image processing partially in linear filters, and we'll cover in more detail here, okay? Then after that, there are these areas here, including V2 and some other areas, that sort of use those filters that have been applied to this filtering that has been applied to the image to, say, organize the information, okay? And then finally, there are these other areas here that are involved in recognition, right? For example, I recognize a specific type of object, like a table or a chair, or I recognize an action, right? Someone running versus walking, what have you. Now, this was then defined as the 3 steps of vision. Number one was called low-level vision. Number 2, it's called mid-level vision. And number 3 here is called, anyone wants to guess? High-level vision, very good. So the reason for this is probably self-evident, right? Low level means I do some low level analysis in the image, right? High level means I do some high level analysis of the image, right? So low level, it's mostly image processing, right? I process the image in a variety of ways. And mostly it's about feature extraction, and we'll talk a lot about this in the next few days. The mid-level vision is how can I use that analysis, that image analysis that I have performed in my images to construct models of what the world looks like. Models that then high-level areas, right? These high-level areas in my brain, like SDS, MT, maybe, certainly IT, these areas can use to do recognition, right? To do the syntactic and semantic analysis that we're describing, right? Semantic, you know, right? It's not a language, but okay. And we'll see that there are a variety of different levels or degrees of levels here in each of these three main groups, right? So in high-level vision, I could do things that are high-level vision, let's say recognize an object, right? Recognize a table, recognize a chair, recognize a car, fine. But there are other tasks that are probably more difficult, like recognizing certain types of actions, right? And there are things even more difficult, which would be things like understanding emotions, right? This is what the hell is an emotion? We'll talk about this. And there are things even higher than this, right? Like what's called, for example, just as an example, what's called theory of mind. And theory of mind, it's the ability that humans have to understand what other humans are thinking about. So think about this for a second. You have the ability to think about what other people are thinking about. So I can think what you're thinking that I'm thinking right now. It's funny, right? But we have that ability. Computers don't. They cannot even think about what they think, let alone someone else's, right? Okay. So there are levels within these levels, right? The complexity can grow very rapidly. Now, in this view, right, we take the modern neuroscience view or cognitive neuroscience view, which you may see out there as a cognitive neuroscience or cognitive science. Cognitive sciences and neuroscience in general, they have an embedded assumption, right? And that assumption is that your brain is a computer. Now, by a computer, I don't mean it's a desktop, the desktop you have at home or your cell phone. That's not the computer you have in your head, right? You have a brain in your head. What I mean is that the brain, although it's made out of meat, is nothing else than a computational machine. Why is that useful? Because we assume that you have an input. The input information, in our case, is going to be vision, right? What we can get with cameras or with the eye bulbs, in our case as humans, right? That is your X. That's the input. Let's call it X. Then you have an output or behavior that you want to perform either internally in your body, right, to achieve homeostasis, or perform an action outside, say to grasp an object, which is your Y. And then your brain does some computations, which is F, a function. So you do f of x equals y. That is the underlying assumption we're making here. And that f, we assume, is an algorithm, right? That's why it's computational. And it's an algorithm. This algorithm, we have it implemented in our brain. One approach to computer vision that I have worked on for many, many years is actually try to decode the algorithm that we use in specific tasks and then implement it in a desktop computer or a cell phone computer or whatever other computer you want to implement it in, right? And the reason you can do that is because once you understand what algorithms our brain uses, you can just copy that algorithm, translate it from neuronal circuit into MATLAB or Java, right? I'm saying Java, Python, right? Okay. So that's a basic underlying assumption that we're making here. Okay. So this approach that I just mentioned is typically called computational modeling, right? So you study the human brain, as it was done in the early days of computer vision, right? You study the human brain, and then you create these so-called computational models of how the brain functions, and then you emulate this in computers. In computer science and computer engineering, one approach that is also related to this, it's neural networks, and of late, deep neural networks, most known as deep learning. Now, deep learning is loosely inspired on all of this, but that's where the beginnings of neural networks and deep learning actually come from. So almost everything, if not everything we're going to cover in this course is based on this model. Okay? Even deep learning. There's one problem with this, that this was built on the knowledge of the neuroscience knowledge and cognitive science knowledge of the time. And now we know that this is actually not how the brain works. So the model we know is wrong, but we're so entrenched into this model within computer vision that it's just too hard to break loose from this, right? And I may add, although we know that this model is incorrect, we still don't have a good picture of what is the right model. So it's not like we have a great solution, alternative solution. But we do know a lot of things. For example, we know that, remember the LGN here? So I go from the retina to the LGN to V1. Well, we know that there are connections from the LGN to a variety of other areas in the brain directly without passing through V1. There's a type of blindness in humans that's called cortical blindness. What that means, it's usually caused by either a stroke or an accident, and you hit your head really hard in an accident, have terrible concussion, or you have a stroke. Then there is the loss of blood flow in a specific area of the brain. And because of that loss of blood flow or too much blood flow, tissue literally dies. And although neurons can regenerate, that regeneration is very slow. So if a stroke, let's say, kills a big patch of V1 here, of neurons in V1, then there is, in fact, something I haven't mentioned. So there is actually a one-to-one mapping between neurons in V1 to your retina map. Okay? So imagine your retina here observing an object. So if you're observing this object, then this object is represented here in your retina, and then it's going to be represented renotopically here in V1 as well. Okay, there's a one-to-one mapping to everything that you observe in the retina. Well, actually, one-to-many mapping, to be precise. But if I have lost these neurons here, then I cannot see that portion of the object. To me, it's blind. And that's called cortical blindness because I'm blind in the cortex, not in my eyes. My eyes see perfectly. I just cannot process that information, right? And there are people that are cortically blind, and they know they're blind because they don't see, right? And there are some of them who are completely blind. I mean, all of V1 is gone, and they're blind. They're literally blind. Until this professor that ask some of these patients to walk down a hallway with boxes placed on the floor. And the patient said, "Are you out of your mind? I don't see. Don't you realize I cannot see? How am I going to walk down the hallway? Let's just try." And not only did they walk down the hallway, they avoided every single box on the floor. Now, they were completely unaware that they were doing this. But the hypothesis is that these connections here that bypass this pathway are actually allowing these people to see. So they actually do see through other pathways. They're just not aware that they see. That means that you and I also see through those pathways, even if we are unaware that we do, right? So there are things like this. There are many things like this. Another one, for example, so the one I've described here states that there are these cells, right? This is neurons, but mostly. These neurons that have long axons that connect this information from the retina or send that information to the retina to LGN in that direction. And then the LGN sends in this direction to V1, and then V1 to V2, and V2 to MT, and ST, and V4, and et cetera, right? Okay. It turns out there are probably more neurons sending information down from areas here to ST, to MT, to V2, to V1, to LGN, than there are cells sending information up. Now, this model means that what we have come to call a bottom-up approach. And the reason for this naming is because if I start with an image here, right? I have an image which I have tilted this way, so I'm writing it in 2D. And then I do some analysis with some neurons, right? Shown here the neurons as circles and the axons or the synapses with lines, right? So each neuron sees specific areas of that image, and then other neurons analyze things that other neurons have analyzed, right? Like this, in a hierarchy. I'm going from the bottom, which is the image, right, to the top. Okay? So, bottom-up approach. But we know that we can also design the reverse. I can have a top-to-bottom approach, right? Right? And we'll talk about that. We do have models that go, obviously most models go bottom up, but there's also newer models that try to go the other way around, right? I'll talk a lot about this. Okay, we only have a few more minutes. Any questions? So the first topic that we are going to cover is image features, and this is going to be included into low-level vision. So that's where computer vision is going to get, or where we're going to start this course, computer vision. Now I'm going to only briefly describe low-level vision because we don't have time for everything or to even get into the detail of a few things. We could spend the whole semester just talking about low-level vision, right? However, it is important that we understand this. And this is going to be a trend in the course. You will see that there are many topics that we're just going to browse, right? We're going to describe the basic math, the basic algorithms, the basic concepts, and we're just going to go over everything pretty quickly. And then once in a while, there are topics that I'm going to spend a lot of time on, right? And the reason is because I personally think they're more interesting, they're more useful right now, but someone else may disagree, right? This is a personal choice, right, that we all have to make. But there are topics where we're going to spend more time because I think they're more timely. Now, for low-level vision, the main task here is to extract features from the image or image features. They're going to be useful for either mid-level vision or for high-level vision, right? And for this, we're going to talk about a variety of filters that were used for many years, still being used, but they were the primary method of analysis for many, many years or decades to extract features from images. Now, to understand this, you need to have taken 5460, and specifically, you have to know pretty much the very basics of, at least the very basics of linear filters. I believe that was lecture 19, so if you want to go to the YouTube channel, I believe that's the lecture. But you should have knowledge about, as I said earlier, Hilbert spaces, norms, and Fourier analysis. And those are lectures 17 to 19. So make sure that you review this if you can before the next lecture, because I will try to summarize those lectures in like 10 minutes. But 10 minutes compared to 3 lectures, you know, like apples and oranges. Okay. Any questions? Nope. All right. So I'll see you Thursday.